Now, in the year since 9/11, since President Obama took office, he's changed the way Americans fight wars, namely with his use of drones to target and kill enemies. Up until this point, he has been silent about this tactic and his involvement in the decision-making process of who is targeted in specific. But last week, he opened up about it on CNN.
Obviously, as president, ultimately I'm responsible for decisions that are made by the administration. But I think what the American people need to know is the seriousness with which we take both the responsibility to keep them safe, but also the seriousness with which we take the need for us to abide by our traditions of rule of law and due process.
President Obama said that there is specific criteria the U.S. uses to conduct drone strikes. It says that a suspected terrorist must be a target that is authorized by U.S. laws, must be a threat that is serious and not speculative, must be in a situation where we cannot capture the individual before they enact a plot against the U.S., must be careful to avoid civilian casualties, and finally, the U.S. citizens that are suspected of terrorism must have the protections of the Constitution and due process. But with the recent ramp-up of drone strikes in Yemen and the rising number of civilian casualties, is the Obama administration sticking to this criteria as stringently as the president says they are? Douglas Macgregor is retired U.S. Army colonel and also the executive vice president of the Burke-McGregor Group, LLC, and joins me now to discuss this very issue. So thank you so much for joining us. Let's start off with the latest information coming out of Yemen. Yesterday, the #2 al-Qaeda member, Saeed al-Sahiri, was killed in an airstrike. Now, I should say that the U.S. hasn't confirmed its involvement in those airstrikes. But can you talk about the ramp-up of the drone program in Yemen?
Well, we've launched, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 strikes this year in Yemen, which is a significant increase over the past. I think what's important to understand is that there are legal authorities that justify the use of force against targets overseas who are considered to be enemies of the United States. Now, General Michael Hayden, when he was the CIA director, said that liberal democracies do not normally wage war on the basis of memoranda locked away in a safe in the Department of Justice, and he urged more openness. But the truth is, it's not open. We really don't know the quality or the value of the intelligence that we're provided and how these targets are selected, and that's part of the problem.
And that is what President Obama spoke about a little bit in that CNN interview, is that he wouldn't confirm his involvement or picking of the targets, but that to some capacity he is involved. Now, Saeed al-Sahiri was detained in Guantanamo Bay for a number of years. He also went through a Saudi rehabilitation institution that's supposed to, I want to get this right, focus on replacing militant ideology with religious moderation. Obviously, those methods didn't work very well if we are gunning him down a few years later.
Well, first of all, in fairness to the Saudis, they have had considerable success with a lot of former al-Qaeda types. But the truth is that right now, this gentleman and most of his peers that are involved on the Sunni Islamist radical side of the equation are really focused on Syria right now. And most of their focus is really internal to the region. You know, distinguishing who really represents a threat from who doesn't is a difficult proposition, because we tend to regard anyone who seems to be opposed to us as a potential adversary. Well, there were lots of people that fall into that category. Killing them, does it really make any difference? What if we didn't kill them? Would it make any difference? I mean, these are questions that we can't answer. We just don't know enough about it. But here's an important point for your viewers to understand. The reason this continues, that has actually increased, is because in the eyes of the American people, this is legitimate. And legitimacy is a powerful force. Americans are convinced that there are large numbers of people out there trying to do us harm, and that killing them, wherever they may show up, whether it's Pakistan, Yemen, Sudan, anywhere, is justified. As long as that perception exists, whether this is truly legal in an international sense makes no difference. It will continue.
Now, I asked Colonel Anthony Schaefer last week if these airstrikes are fighting or fostering terrorists, and I'd like to get your opinion on that.
Well, those of us that have looked at this point out that we continue to kill large numbers of people, and we're told that there are still more to be killed. So if the idea is that somehow or another you're thinning the ranks, it doesn't seem to work. In fact, you can make a good argument that we're cultivating the emergence of more enemies, new cells that are not necessarily bred from some central location in northern Pakistan. They pop up as independent franchises, again in response to us, into the perception that we are trying to impose military political hegemony on the region. So in that sense, I think in many cases these are in fact counterproductive.
And I also want to take a look at what qualifies as a military target. So to start off, we need to look at the number of drone strikes in Yemen. Back in 2002, there was only one, I think we have a graphic to show this. There was only one, and in 2011 there was 10, and in this year there have been 33. Now, part of this reason could be that the Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula took advantage of the Arab Spring to start controlling the south part of Yemen. And this next chart that I want to show you, if we can bring that up really fast, this is the number of civilian casualties versus militant Al-Qaeda casualties. Casualties of militants are in the red, so it's significantly higher. But I mean, according to the New York Times article, those who qualify as a militant are, quote, all military-aged males in a strike zone unless there's explicit intelligence posthumously proving them innocent. So it's all males.
Well, innocent until proven guilty. And here's another piece of bad news. There's a tendency to regard the collateral damage that occurs as the fault of those who are foolish enough to support or be associated with the targets. In other words, if you're providing any sort of sustenance, if you're meeting with these people, you are by definition guilty. Therefore, you deserve to go down with the target in the strike. Again, I think these are counterproductive. I don't think that they're working their magic by any stretch of the imagination. And again, the last 1,000 years of history suggests that if we are less visible in the region and we are less active in this regard, that the people that live in the region will turn their attentions to their enemies in the region and not us.
Now, I laid out a little bit earlier the 5 criteria that President Obama says that he uses to use these drone strikes. To the best of your knowledge, is he following those criteria?
I'm sure he is. And again, this is a judgment call. This is, you know, the president sits at his desk and he's handed something by people he trusts who are telling him these people deserve the worst. What is he supposed to do? How much of his day does he devote to systematically examining the underlying intelligence to determine whether or not this makes any sense? I don't think he's got the time. There are a lot of people who are supposed to deliberate about this. But again, you're dealing with the same people now who were there in the last 5 to 10 years under the previous administration. They see the world through a lens. So they see lots and lots of enemies who deserve to be destroyed. Whether or not that's justified, whether or not that makes any sense, particularly at this point in time, that's another matter entirely. So I don't think the president is lying by any means when he says this is what I'm doing. Whether or not it's effective, you know, who else is externally reviewing this and advising it? That's the question.
So just to be very clear for our viewers, what you're saying is, to the best of the president's knowledge, he is following this criteria,
yes,
but not necessarily to the best of the military intelligence community's knowledge.
Well, again, you know, the same people are there who were there 5 and 10 years ago. There has been no change. They see the world in a certain way, even if that doesn't necessarily align with reality.
All right, let's go back to Yemen for a minute. The Yemeni government's involvement in these airstrikes. The former president Ali Abdul Saleh transferred power to his vice president back in February to quell the Arab Spring unrest. Saleh was very complicit with the U.S. airstrikes, and his vice president seems to be even more so because more strikes have happened in Yemen. So is it only the U.S. that is advocating for these drone strikes to save American lives and kill their enemies in the process, or is it Yemen as well?
Well, there are some other factors at work here. It's a more complex issue. First of all, there are people who are opposed to the status quo in the Middle East. Many of them may or may not be associated with Al-Qaeda. Most of them are Islamists, and at the moment, Sunni Islamists. Governments that want to stay in power are happy in many cases to see these people vanish. So there's a willingness to work with us to see their political opponents, if you will, people who could be destabilizing, vanish from the scene. And there's another aspect, and that's money. If you want to do business with the United States, if you want to benefit from foreign aid, especially a poor country like Yemen, then you're predisposed to cooperate with us. And you're not going to obstruct us, because to obstruct us puts you in a very difficult position.
And very quickly, we're just about out of time, but I do want to ask you, if it was up to you, what would we do with these drone strikes?
Well, I would suspend them immediately, unless I could be persuaded that they were having a positive impact. And I just don't see that they are at this point. I think we need to suspend them, re-examine the whole process, re-examine who we're killing and why.
All right, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, thank you so much for joining us. Douglas Macgregor is a U.S. retired Army colonel and also the executive vice president of Burke McGregor Group, LLC.